Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're going to take a look at a gripping and honestly terrifying piece of history to totally debunk one of the most famous maritime myths out there, the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. And to do that, we're going to look really closely at the tragic fate of the USS Cyclops. 306. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the exact number of lives lost, literally without a single trace on the USS Cyclops. To this day, it actually remains the largest single non-combat loss of life in U.S. Navy history. It's an absolutely massive human tragedy that, well, eventually just got swallowed up by science fiction. So, to figure out how this happened, we first need to get a feel for the ship itself. The USS Cyclops was an absolute titan for its time. We're talking about a 542-foot massive collier, basically a giant cargo ship. Now, during World War I, she wasn't just hauling coal. She was loaded down with this incredibly dense manganese ore. Keep that detail in mind, it's absolutely crucial because they desperately needed that ore for munitions for the war effort. All right, let's trace her final doomed voyage. So she leaves Rio de Janeiro on February 16th, 1918, and makes it to Salvador. But then in early March, she makes this really ominous, totally unscheduled stop in Barbados. Why? Because the ship was sitting dangerously low in the water. I mean, she was loaded way over her plimsoll line. That mark on the hull that tells you the absolute maximum safe depth. But despite that massive glaring warning sign, on March 4th, she departs for Baltimore and never returns. Now, we really can't talk about the Cyclops without talking about its commander, Captain George W. Worley. And boy, by all accounts from naval intelligence, this guy was, well, he was an erratic and deeply unpopular leader. The guy was known to roam around the ship, making his rounds dressed in nothing but long underwear and a derby hat. Seriously, he verbally and physically abused his crew and supposedly even chased an ensign around the deck with a pistol. So yeah, this incredibly volatile leadership, it's a huge piece of our puzzle. Let's zoom out to the macro level for a second. The Cyclops just vanished somewhere on that route back to Baltimore, somewhere within a massive 500,000 square mile expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. That is an area roughly bordered by Bermuda, Miami, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. It is a vast, totally unforgiving, and deeply isolated stretch of water. Section 1, the Bermuda Triangle, a legend is born. It's precisely because of disappearances in this specific area that this massive cultural phenomenon kicked off. Let's look at how the myth actually started. So, writers and Hollywood producers really latched onto tragedies like the Cyclops, and later on, Flight 19, heavily sensationalizing them. People started pushing these wildly popular, totally supernatural theories to explain away the disasters. Some folks claimed it was leftover technology from Atlantis. Others pointed to that submerged Bimini Rhoda rock formation. Steven Spielberg even used the triangle in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, hinting that alien UFO abductions were the culprit. But then, in 1975, a research librarian named Lawrence David Cush comes along and completely dismantles the whole thing. He wrote, "The legend of the Bermuda Triangle is a manufactured mystery perpetuated by writers who purposely or unknowingly made use of misconceptions." And his research was brilliant. It proved that the number of disappearances there wasn't proportionally any higher than in any other well-traveled part of the ocean. Basically, the whole mystery was just sloppy research used to sell sensational books. So let's actually look at the facts here and contrast those sci-fi myths with the deadly, very real realities of navigating this ocean. The natural explanations are vast, and they're proven. We've got compass variations, we've got the incredibly powerful, fast-moving Gulf Stream, add in violently unpredictable tropical weather, methane hydrates that can literally disrupt a ship's buoyancy, and maybe the biggest one, human error. When awful weather meets terrible navigation, the ocean is plenty deadly all on its own. And for the ultimate debunking, just look at the official stance of the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. They maintain that there are absolutely no supernatural explanations for these disasters. Actually, scratch that. It goes even further. The U.S. Board of Geographic Names doesn't even recognize the Bermuda Triangle as a real place. They don't even keep a file on it. It just goes to show you that the violent forces of nature easily outdo any science fiction. Which, of course, naturally brings us right back to our main historical mystery. So what actually happened to the USS Cyclops out there in those dark waters back in 1918? Section 2, Investigating the Cyclops, the reality. Let's dive into the data to really understand this tragedy, using hard facts and physics instead of myths and aliens. Let's directly contrast the rumored causes of the sinking against what the ship actually faced mechanically. Now, the myth tells us she was sunk by German U-boats or supernatural forces, even though the German Navy flat out denied any knowledge of the ship. But the reality? Well, before leaving port, Commander Worley actually reported that the starboard engine had a cracked cylinder, meaning it was completely dead. So you have a crippled ship hauling 10,800 tons of shifting ore. Not good. And the human element on board was just as much of a powder keg. Right before the ship vanished, U.S. Consul Livingston actually sent this incredibly eerie telegram from Barbados. It read, "While not having any definite grounds, I fear fate worse than sinking, the possibly based on instinctive dislike felt towards master." I mean, wow! That powerfully highlights Captain Worley's incompetence and really hints at severe unrest, mutiny, or just catastrophic human error happening under a captain everyone despised. And you can see this impending doom right in the hard numbers. The normal maximum capacity for the Cyclops was 8,000 long tons, but her overload cargo on this fatal trip, they pushed it to 10,800 long tons. She was severely overloaded with this incredibly heavy, unfamiliar cargo that the crew just wasn't used to handling or securing properly. So this creates a fatal, cascading chain of events. This is the tragic reality that both naval investigators and experts from Lloyd's of London put together. First, the canvas hatches over the cargo fail in rough seas, which lets water flood in. Then, that incredibly dense manganese ore mixes with the water, becomes this wet slurry, and shifts inside the hold. That makes the ship list heavily to one side. Next, this crippled, single-engine ship gets caught in 30 to 40 knot winds from a violent storm. And finally, the ship's eroded I-beams just snap under the extreme strain of the hull hanging suspended between these massive waves, and the ship literally breaks apart. And if you need more proof that this was a structural failure and not some supernatural event, get this. The Cyclops had identically built sister ships, the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus. Both of them also vanished at sea, completely without a trace, during World War II. And guess what they were carrying? Heavy, metallic bauxite ore. They suffered the exact same catastrophic fate, all thanks to the corrosive nature of the cargo and the structural design flaws built right into their class. Moving on to Section 3, the true dangers of the deep. Let's wrap things up and reflect on what we really need to take away from this explainer when it comes to the realities of the ocean. Ultimately, human fallibility and natural forces are just so much more potent than any sci-fi story. While sensationalized, mystery-mongering books basically invented the myth of the Bermuda Triangle just to sell copies, the truth is that physics, violent weather, immense shifting cargo, and a deeply erratic captain are what actually sank the USS Cyclops. Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Are we more captivated by the comforting illusion of a supernatural mystery or the terrifying reality of nature's indifferent power? You know, we humans just love a good ghost story. It makes the unknown feel sort of magical instead of dangerous. But the historical truth and the actual physics of the world around us, they are always far more fascinating and definitely far more instructive. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.